Hello everybody, and welcome to this talk on packages and your data in Umbraco Cloud. My name is Soren Lund, and I'm the founder of uCommerce. We do an e-commerce platform for Umbraco, and so this of course is very interesting to us, because we want to make sure that everything that we do also works with the shiny new bits from Umbraco. Before we get started, how many of you have taken a look at Umbraco Cloud? 1, 2, 3, 4, 20, 15 of you? Okay. How many of you have actually deployed a website, a production website to Umbraco Cloud? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. So there's room to improve. What I wanted to do with this talk is sort of give you a recipe of how we made uCommerce work with Umbraco Cloud, so we could do content deployment and structural data, all the things that you've seen Niels do probably over and over again, creating some document types on one environment and then moving it to another automatically. This is what we want to do for uCommerce as well. We have data that's similar to document types. We call them definitions, but it's basically the same thing, but for e-commerce. And we want that to be a seamless part of Umbraco Cloud. So as part of Code Garden this year, we announced the new version of uCommerce that does this. And this slideshow is basically sort of laying out the journey to get there, because this is undocumented, very new stuff. The platform did change as we were building against it, which is always fun when you have to get up in front of 400 people and demo it. But it went okay. So before we get into the actual bits of how we did it, I just want to talk a little bit about what Umbraco Cloud actually looks like. So normally, when we work with Umbraco, we have one environment that has, web application and a database. That's it. But Cloud, of course, changes that, and it gives us up to 4 environments. I only have the 3. So you would be working on your local environment. This is your machine, basically. You would deploy to development, where you would make your changes and make everything ready, and then finally deploy to live, which actually opens up for some interesting problems, because information that has been created over here now needs to flow freely over there for everything to work. This is what you've been spending a lot of time on in doing automation, continuous delivery, and all that, and that's what Umbraco Cloud does. And of course, we need to support that with packages and our code. So what are the types of information that we need to move between environments? Well, there are 2 types. There's content. This is your images, your content, the stuff that your editors are creating, and it's structural data. So basically document types, the foundation on which you build your actual content. That's created over here and then moved over there. And we need some bits to make that happen. So to make it happen, we have Courier. How many of you have tried out Courier? 1, 2, 3, 25, good. How many have had a good experience with Courier? 4, okay. How many have had a bad experience with Courier? That's 20, okay. So the reason I asked this question is because this is a pattern I've seen many times before. And I just want to sort of talk a little bit about Courier actually sitting underneath the covers of Umbraco Cloud and what that means. This is a brand new version of Courier, Courier 3, I think, or Umbraco Deploy, as it's called now. So, and it is running as a fundamental piece of Umbraco Cloud. So in order for the cloud to work, Courier must also work. So I would encourage you to try it out again. It will be better than the last time. To be able to move data between these environments, Courier needs to be able to think about data in a single format, basically. And so that's where this item comes into play. So regardless of your data being a content or a file or a document type or whatever, it will all get turned into an item, which is a shared way of thinking about data. So we can move it from A to B and make comparisons and all that good stuff. But in order to do it, we need to plug into Courier to make it go, basically. And so that's where these item providers come into play. So they're sitting on either end of the equation, on the source environment and the destination environment. This is how Umbraco actually moves data back and forth. They have an item provider for content, and they have an item provider for media, and so on and so forth. So every time you have a thing that you need to move from A to B, it needs an item provider, basically. Make sense? It's just a very simple class, data in, data out. That's basically what we're talking about here. There are two modes of operation for these item providers because of the two different types of data. So initially, what Umbraco would do is it would take your data, use query, and turn it into a file, which sounds great. That was the first version of Umbraco Cloud, but it changed over time. So there's actually now two modes of working. Make it into a file, move it over to another environment, and then load it back up, or through a web service where the two environments will actually communicate directly. And why would we do that? Well, think about your biggest content site you ever did with 10,000 content nodes or 20,000, right? Turning those into files, it takes a while, and it's not necessarily what you're after. So in that case, you create it in one environment, you move it over via web services, but it's the same mechanism. Just so you know, there are two different ways of making this happen. Make sense? If you have any questions, put up your hand and ask it. It's always fun to get some interaction going. So that's for the data. So basically taking all the different bits and bobs we have and turning them into something that looks alike. Then we have the item resolvers. This is to figure out. So imagine you have a page and you have an image on that page, or a rich text editor that has a link to another node. Umbraco is not necessarily aware that there is a link to another piece of content inside the rich text editor or inside a grid or something like that. So we need a way to deal with that, because when an editor is moving a piece of content from A to B, they probably expect that the associated content also go over to the other environment, right? I think that's fair. And that's what the resolvers are for, basically to go in and investigate the data that's sitting in the different, on your content nodes, figuring out if there's something that needs to go along with the data you're currently moving. So again, it's not rocket science, very simple stuff. We just look at the data and say, well, here is a link to a piece of media that we also need to move. Here is a link to a product in e-commerce that we also need to move. And here is a link to another piece of content, right? With me so far? Okay, that's it. So that's all that's required to make things go between the environments. I just want to point out one thing here on this here. It is slightly different than your normal environment, because typically what you have in your environment is the web application, the database, and a file system. But the other thing is Git. How many of you are familiar with Git? Everybody, great. So I don't have to explain that. That's where the files go that are generated by these item providers. And Git is incidentally also the thing that moves data back and forth between the environments. So I think that's the sort of a key insight in Umbraco Cloud, that they figured, why not make Git the thing that we actually commit things to, because it can already compare and merge and all that, and just put it someplace else by pulling, right? So pretty cool stuff. So that's the basics. Let's take a look at how we actually do it. My goal with these slides here is to give you a way of working with custom data. So if you have some data that you extended Umbraco with, maybe created a custom data store, created a package yourself, or something like that you need to move for your clients, this is the recipe. Code and everything. So we'll get into it. But before that, let's take a look at what you actually need. Because it's not just item providers and resolvers and things like that. Packages, and this is important to realize, need to work with Umbraco Cloud. So for us, we need a custom database to work. We live inside the Umbraco database, but we need some tables, we need to modify web config, we need to modify some Umbraco settings, things of that nature. So to make that go, we actually have to do a little more. We actually had to spend a lot of time changing our package installation, because the package is now no longer installed in the same way that it used to. Probably all of you have tried downloading a package from uploading a local package, installing it, right? Everybody's tried this, and that's great. But that installation goes away, so, sort of some of the time, because it's not all the time. That would be too easy. And then we need to figure out what we need to migrate data structure and content data. So let's start with package installation. This is what you're used to. You have an Umbraco environment, you take your package, and you put it on your environment. Great, everybody's happy. But we have multiple environments now. Now we have 3 of them. And one of the things that we know to be true is that if you can install a package on one environment, it will happen on every environment. So Umbraco has a concept here called content flow, where the idea is that ideally content would flow from left to right. which makes sense. We set up our document type, we move it into development, we move it into live. It flows from left to right. We set up our content, we try it out on our development system, then move it to live. It flows from left to right. And ideally, you would only install a package on the local environment, because then it can move from left to right. But of course, the installation UIs that you're familiar with in Umbraco, they're right there on development and live. So I guarantee you one thing, installations will happen here and here and here. So ideally, we'd like to support that, so it just moves back and forth. Make sense? We just want to make it as seamless as possible, as frictionless as possible. So that's what the installation needs to support, and this is important for you when you install packages that you want to use on Umbraco Cloud. Ideally, you want to install them here and then just move them up. But the package may not necessarily be able to actually make the transition, and I'll tell you why. Because this is what happens, right? There's only one installation that actually occurs when the package is added. So this is where the normal installation will happen. But then a second move will be to pull the package to another environment. Fair enough, right? The package becomes part of the GitHub repository, is then pulled down to the local environment. You hit F5 in Visual Studio, and guess what? You probably expect that everything will just work. But the problem for a package is that there's no this installation cycle here that we need to actually initialize and set up and make everything ready. It doesn't happen. It's just a pull, and all of a sudden, everything needs to work. So packages need to be aware that they can move from one environment to another. The database may not be there. It needs to be spun up. Configuration files, things in the environment needs to be. We need to be able to discover that you actually moved us someplace else, and we need to be able to reinitialize so we just work. But the goal for us is basically to enable you to hit F5 and you won't notice the difference. But the thing is, standard package installation on Umbraco does not work like this. So we need another way. Here is the optimum flow, right? You install over here, you push up, but the same thing will happen again. The database down here may not be up to date, so it needs to change, and same thing on live. So we basically need to be able to reinitialize ourselves. So traditional packages, you need to install them on every environment. So if you're running a web farm or something like that, you would have to go to server A, B, and C, and install it on every environment. Great, it'll work. And you have to update it on every environment as well, if you wanted to go to a new version. Again, that's how we did it, but this is not how it works anymore. Now, the package will actually just move to another environment. So we need to come up with something different. So for lack of a better term, I came up with something I call Headless Packages. Because this is what we need basically from modern packages on Umbraco. They need to be able to install on any environment, so live, production, local, and they need to automatically be able to set themselves up again if they are moved to another environment. Databases are particularly annoying, but there are other things that need to go as well. So how do we do that? Well, we don't do it with package actions, that's for sure, because they will not run as part. They will only run as part of the installation, right? And the installation only occurs on one environment, but not the two other ones. So that's a problem. And they're also going away, which is another problem. So what do we do? Well, at UCommerce, we tend to look at a problem like this, or a challenge like this, I should say, either by solving it the Umbraco way or the .NET way. And if we can, we'd like to make a solution that actually works across all versions of Umbraco, because things change over the span of a platform's lifetime. It makes sense, we do the same thing. If we can go to the .NET version of things, we know that will work every time regardless of Umbraco version. So what I'm going to give you is a way of creating this headless installation where it can initialize itself and it can do sort of whatever you need there. So the first way we can go is in Umbraco 6, application event handlers. You can register that, run the package initialization. Only problem is if you want to support 6.0 or 4.0 like we do, this will not work because we're then dependent of the platform version. So we have to do something different. Going forward in Umbraco 8, and I think it's actually already out. Per, help me out. Package migrations, are they out yet or is it 8? Okay. But package migration is the new thing that will replace the package actions that we know. And they will basically run like this. So this will be a way forward. Maybe 8, maybe sooner if it's close. So that would be a way to go. But still, it's only 8 or whatever version it's introduced. So every version before that, we can't install on using that method. So now we're looking at 2 different ways of doing it. So it's not so good. So the generic .NET way is the way that we leverage to make sure that we can use the same approach for initialization across all versions of Umbraco going back to V4, basically. So what we do is, .NET has this concept of a pre-application startup method attribute. And basically what it does is it runs very, very early in the startup cycle for an application. So you're familiar with the application start events that run as part of a global ASAX, right? This runs even before that, because we need to make sure that we get in there as soon as possible before the system actually tries to run and breaks down with a yellow screen of death, right? Because something isn't set up. So we get in with that, and basically what we do is we specify a method that should run right there. And what we do is we register an HTTP module temporarily. So why not just run the installer here? Well, Umbraco may have dependencies on the web context depending on which API you're using. Right? So if you've seen this, if you try and take the Umbraco API and run it outside of a web context, sometimes it works, other times it doesn't. So just to make sure, we register an installer HTTP module so we can install in the actual web request, so a little later on. So we just register the intent of initializing, but we're not actually initializing at this point. Does that make sense? Just to stay within the context of Umbraco. So the HTTP module is fairly simple stuff. You've probably done a ton of these. Just implement the standard interface from .NET. Pick the event you want to initialize on. Double lock, because we don't want to run the installer twice. That would create some interesting scenarios. So just make sure that it only runs once, and then you can do whatever you want. This works across all versions of Umbraco, and you can just drop a DLL basically in the bin folder, and you're good to go. So it's pretty neat. So this code you can just grab and use. Make sense? Any questions? Ooh, good. As an added bonus, I said we had to do a lot of work to make this go, and it's not quite true, because we had spent some time on another technology that you may be familiar with, NuGet. So if you think about it, a NuGet package, it's actually the same as when Umbraco is moving between environments. Because think about when you grab a package from NuGet, you pull it down into Visual Studio, and what happens? You hit F5, and you expect everything to work, right? So this method I just described will work with NuGet as well. So if you plan on releasing your own stuff as a package, you will get this for free. Good. Quick comment on web config. Sometimes you need to modify it, sometimes we do too. Don't, because it won't work. Web config is a holy file in Umbraco Cloud. You can modify it right here, but you can't modify it there. You can, and it will work for a time, and then it won't anymore once, because it's not committed to the Git repository as far as I can tell. So you can change the web config on local. It's basically like what you're used to today. It's fine. And you can then push it to the other environment, and it will continue to work. But if you do install there, or there, then it becomes a different matter. It will work for a while, and then it will cease to work. So don't change the web config there. Use transformations instead. You're familiar with this from Visual Studio, where you have the release and debug configurations. You can do some transformations in there. This is the same, but just adapted to Umbraco Cloud. So you can go in and say, for the development environment, these are the things I want to execute, and for the live environment, these are the things I want to execute. And the guys in Umbraco were very helpful in implementing a little thing for us where we can actually do vendor-specific transformations, because we may have something we want to do, you may have something you want to do. So to avoid having to merge the same transformations, you can have your own little thing if you add your own name, I think there or there, I forget where it is. Just to make it a little simpler. So that's just a little thing. But at the end of the day, what we end up with is a situation like this. You can install on any environment, you can move it to any environment, and it will just continue to work. So this is how, at least to my mind, a modern package on Umbraco should work. And it's worth looking into when you're installing packages, whether that's the case, whether it's needed. Unfortunately, right now, there's not an easy way to see. Maybe some compatibility on our in the future. And of course, you can also do the NuGet thing, and that will work as well. Make sense? We have 15 minutes left, so this is going to be fast. Are you ready? Are you ready? A little bit. Good. So now we need to move some data from one environment to the other, and we have these two types of data. We have content and structure, right? So let's look at what content would look like from our perspective. Well, from our perspective, it would be products or categories or catalogs or stores, things like that, right? So that's one example. For structure, we have the concept we call product definitions. Think of them as document types, but for products, same thing. So it's structural data that tell us how UI should look and how you edit your products and where you want your multilingual properties to live and all that good stuff. So that's it. Those are the two things we'd like to ideally be able to move. And quick note on data that moves between systems. Think about moving an object from one system to the other that has an identifier on it. What would we like on an object like that? Any ideas? How do we identify the object? Ints? Huh? It has to be unique. And not just unique, it has to be unique across environments. And what's not unique across environments? Ints, right? So do remember to GUID all the things. The way when we started out with this, we figured, well, ints are great, so we have ints on everything, and that's how links are created. And then we have a GUID on everything now because we need to do this. There is a way to deal with it that I'm going to show you, but this is why you're starting to see GUIDs on everything in Umbraco. You see the int and the GUID right underneath it in the new UIs. Good, so let's take a look at structure data. The scenario here is a content editor that goes to the development system and starts to edit a definition or a doc type, but a definition in this case. So basically, we want to create a inherited definition that has some shared properties across these different types of products. And we want that to move from one environment to the next. So let's look at what we need. So what's happening here is actually fairly simple stuff. Normally, when you edit on a web page, you go to the web page and you store it in the database. So the only new thing here is that we also go to the file system, or, well, it's actually only the file system. We never see Git, which is kind of cool. It just picks it up. So we need our definition to be stored in SQL and also serialized in the file system. That's the new thing. So here's the thing we need to have happen. We need to create an item provider that will take the object and turn it into a file. Then on the other side, we need the same item provider to take the file and turn it into data we can put in the database. And it all needs to happen automatically. Good. So this is the chain of events that gets us there. The challenge for us, at least, is that this happens in a UI that we do from end to end. So that means we have to pick up the event. We have to signal Umbraco that there's something that needs to be stored, and then it stores it, right? So edit save will actually trigger, we can trigger the event to make Umbraco save this file using something called the basic event manager. So that just stores the intent of saving, and the item provider here will then come in later on and then handle the packing of the file, so creating that binary file. Or actually just creating the object that represents the item, if that makes sense. And then .NET will ultimately serialize that information to disk. So it's not rocket science, it's very simple. We need to poke something that then pokes Umbraco to actually store the thing. That's it. Then what happens is that for the purpose of this, I created a website called, this was before the rebranding, US Clean. That's just how it ended up. I'm sorry, but that's it. But what happens once the process is done is that you have a folder that corresponds to the provider you set up. And you can see here that we have data types and definitions, so they are actually related information. The definition requires a data type to work, basically. So the item provider is able to go in and also suck in additional data that might be required to restore it on the other end. Quick note, if you do something like this, remember to prefix the folder. If you don't, it'll clash. So remember just to, if you're doing a package, use your company name or your own name. A dream of mine is to have my name in a package someday. So it should say Soren _ product definitions. Sadly, it does not. If you look inside of the file, or the folder rather, this is what it looks like, the GUID. Remember, GUID all the things. And inside of that file, we just have some XML. So again, no rocket science. We just poke the thing to make Umbraco convert it into something Umbraco can sort of universally understand, then serialize it into a file. It ends up in the file system, in Git, and can then be pushed to another environment. Make sense? Good. Let's take a look at the ItemProvider then. It's just a class, very simple. You inherit the ItemProvider. In the constructor, you give it the configuration it needs to know how to deal with the serialization. So the folder right there, remember the prefix, and there are two GUIDs that are important. There's the GUID that identifies the provider, and then there's a second GUID, but that's later on. So basically, the ItemProvider GUID and the path, that's what you want here. Everything else is just for references added to the file. Good. So now we need to poke the beast to make it do things. And so in our UIs, when you're up here and you're saving a definition, when you hit the save button, the way we do that is we execute what we call a pipeline. So basically it's like an event, but just a different implementation, and we can hook into that. So what we have is basically a little app that goes in and adds a task to that particular thing. So it's like registering an event handler. And in there, we just use this bit of code here to notify that we have something we want to store. So the T would be the event, or the entity, and the item identifier would be the unique thing that identifies the item. And finally here, we can then send it off to the provider, basically. So we poked it. We queued it, basically, for being saved. So Umbraco will then turn around and call handle pack, and that's where you need to get your hands a little more dirty. Again, it's not rocket science. Most of this code is your code or our code. There's not a lot of ceremony, which is something that's really awesome about how this works. So you can see here we have the ItemProvider, so this is another method on that. We need to pack it, so we get the item ID, so we're told which thing we need to pack, and we need to return an item, so this is that general thing that Umbraco has. So from our perspective, we have created a definition item. This is just a DTO, very simple object with just some properties on it. That's it. And it has two properties in this case, a GUID and a name, and that's it. So, and we access our data access layer here to get the full set of data for this thing. This is here where you would use Petapoco or something like this. We use in Hibernate, so that looks like that. And then we iterate over all the related information, so we can create some dependencies down here, and this is where we will actually kick off the process again with another ItemProvider, but for data types in this case. So when we add dependencies to the item, that signals Umbraco again to start to generate more files for the related stuff. So if you contrast that or sort of parallel that to content with an image on it, like we talked about before, that's actually a dependency that's happening. Make sense? So we're just leveraging, it's hooked right into Umbraco the same way Umbraco uses it itself. Let's see, how are we doing on time? Oh, not great. From there, we have a DTO, and it's just standard.NET serialization. There's no magic or anything like that. Simple stuff. And we end up in the file system with something like this, XML, like we've seen a million times before. Now, here's the cool thing. Are you ready for this? Prepare yourselves. Okay, you weren't quite ready, I think. Let's try that again. Now here's the cool thing. Are you ready for this? Okay, fair enough. There we go, that's what I'm looking for. Good, because the really cool thing is I lied a little bit before. I said it only serializes things, but the signal actually also goes out to the console of Umbraco Cloud. So this here actually contains the file that was just created, and Umbraco Cloud has knowledge that there's something queued to be moved from one environment to the next, and magic will happen when we click this, because the files are pushed here, and the reverse process starts. Right? But think about it: Git is actually surfaced here in a UI and a content editor can use it to move things about. That's pretty cool. That's actually pretty friggin' cool, if you ask me. Good, so that was data out. Now we need data back in, right? So we push the stuff from our development environment via Git, and it ends up in the file system that is then signaled to start kick off the deserialization process that will give us a DTO. So again, a simple thing. It's the same thing we had before, and then we extract it, and this is where all the hard stuff happens. So, luckily, I can replace all the hard stuff with a little star that just says magic on it, because it's not really so important for what we're doing here. But this is basically where you need to do all the hard work. You need to figure out you're standing with an object in hand, and you need to merge that with maybe create it from scratch. That's pretty easy, but you may have to merge it with the existing version of itself. You need to go through it and figure out how you want to merge, and that can be tricky. It can be simple depending on what you're doing. For us, it's magic complicated. Good. So let's look at the deserialization. That's very simple. Basically, this is all you need to tell Umbraco. The only thing you're telling it is you have a stream or a byte array, so the binary representation of the thing, and you just tell Umbraco what you want it turned into. So that's it. Simple. So now we have the DDO in hand, and we need to take that and convert it into the actual thing, your own custom data on the other side of the equation. There's that magic again. So we get the item in, that we cast it, because we're in this on the inside of the API, we know that it's a definition item because of the GUIDs that are floating around that tells us what it actually is. We then find, if it exists, the existing piece of data that's ours, the definition. It's not a definition item, it's just a definition. And then we do all the magic, merge the two things, create, update, all that. This is specific to your app and ours. Then we save using our data layer, and then we return the item, and we're done. So now we have the data moved from A to B. We have it merged via all the magic, and we're basically good to go, like that, right? That's the structured data. This is also how Umbraco does it. So you can do it with your own stuff, and you can do it with our stuff. And the cool thing is that it's part of the same overall content flow, right? It's totally seamless from a content editor's point of view, which is super duper cool, because it allows us to create that same experience for our stuff, and you can do the same. Good, so let's talk about another scenario, those resolvers we talked about, where we take a look at the data that sits on a content node and other data and see what we can use it for. So the scenario is this. The beauty of content and commerce is that it's merged together in one system. So you can create all your content marketing, all that awesome stuff that makes the combination really valuable compared to, say, a Magento that only does commerce but no content. But then the question arises, when we do have a content node in Umbraco like this, a page with some products on it, how do we, when we need to move this from one environment to the other, realize that these three products also need to be part of that act of moving data between environments? That's where item resolvers come in. So let me just show you real quick. What we do here is we receive an event that asks us, should it execute? And basically what we're looking for is, to do this, we have a property editor that you can add on your document type, right? Fairly simple stuff. We then actually just look for that property editor to qualify the resolver and see if it should execute or not. Then, once we've done that, we do it all over again. We look at all the data that's on the item on the node. We look at the values, and shame on us, we're doing ints, right? We're converting the ints to GUIDs in this case. We're then finding all the products are stored as an int array on the page. We take the ints, we split the ints, and we then access our data access layer, and we add dependencies, not to our own stuff, but to something Umbraco is currently moving from one area to another. That's pretty cool, right? We're not only hooked into moving our own stuff, we're actually hooked into the act of moving default data from Umbraco, which to my mind is super cool that they've kept that open so we can actually get in there and be part of the overall equation. They thought about it from all the way from A to C, basically. And with that, the process kicks off again, and all the handle pack and all that happens. It's moved, you can click the button, and it's all done. And that's it. Easy peasy, right? Do you have any questions? We have less than -1 minute left. No questions? Everything is clear? That's great. I do have one more thing. If commerce is your thing, or you want to make it your thing, we do training on new commerce every month. It's free, it's online, 4 half days. You can sign up, and the next one runs in January. So if you're interested in that, come up and see me, give me a card or your email address, and I'll make sure that to get you on the next thing. Thank you very much.